Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be out here today. I love the opportunity to come and meet with everyone here in Vancouver. So my background is really, I've gone through many editorial roles. I started out as a web editor. I am married to an IT guy who works deeply on the production side. And for this presentation, I also interviewed a bunch of people through the office. So TVA Group, through a recent acquisition of TC Media Titles, is Canada's largest magazine publisher. And we have a whole raft of titles, more than 35 titles, including Canadian Living, Elle Canada, Elle Quebec, The Hockey News, Canadian Gardening, Style at Home, many, many publications. So over the years, I've kind of worked myself into a role as not only working on books and special issues and all these things, but also as sort of an internal workflow consultant. I've been in the business since 2001. I've seen all kinds of things that can delay production, can create team dysfunctions. So I won't be naming any names, but what I'm doing today is trying to bring to you some of the things that are common pitfalls across platforms and give you a sense of what I feel the best practices are there and what some of the tools that you might use to address some of those problems would be. So I like to make lots of diagrams. This is my little diagram on multi-platform content production and you don't need to study this too closely, but you'll have the presentation deck after. But the idea is really just that in order to create a multi-platform workflow, you really do need to bring a lot of the process up to the very beginning of that. So you're really needing to dovetail together print, digital, and interactive edition work right at the beginning and interweave it in order for it to come together really successfully. When you try to do that, a lot of teams have shifted and integrated and so forth over time. A lot of little problems can crop up. Starting with a couple of things on digital content, and I'll credit Steve Kowalet, who's the digital director for Elle Canada, with some of these ideas, certainly. Elle Canada recently went through a really great transformation where they used to have kind of a print group and a digital group on a staff of about 18 people, and they went through a process of heavily integrating that. So now everyone has digital and print responsibilities, and that learning process is certainly, there's a lot to learn from that. So my first production snag is really when teams are working on digital content, if they don't have KPIs, key performance indicators for their work, it can really be a huge time waster and people can really get lost in it. So if they don't know what it is that they need to really come up with to succeed, it can definitely cause some problems. So if they understand and it's sort of publicly stated what sort of digital goals they're going for in terms of page views and so forth, and I'll go through those in a minute, then you can have staff sitting around spending a lot of time trying to write the right piece, and there's a bit of fear of completion. Like, once I post this, what if it doesn't work? So we see that happening on some teams. So the Elle team gets together weekly. They sit down and work out their overall goals. And they actually have a daily scrum on what everyone's planning to post that day. Everyone's responsible for at least one piece of digital content a day. Some people are responsible for 3 or 4 pieces a day. And that's in addition to their print work. And that happens even on print production days. So they've also agreed what their brand does and does not do. So they will leap into discussions on what royal babies are wearing today, but there are certain topics that even though they're trending, they won't approach because those are not right for their brand. So that means that when staff are trying to figure out how to be part of current content, they're not trying to be part of everything, and that does definitely save some time. So just looking at what some of those KPIs are, they look at page views, time spent, likes, shares, open rates, click-throughs, and conversions to purchase. They look at everything within the first hour stories are posted, within the first days and for the week. Through the course of the week, Steve will sit down with each staff member and look at what percentage of their weekly goal they've achieved and talk about how they could tweak that. He does a lot of tests with his own personal accounts in order to try some wacky experiments outside of the main brand accounts to see if there's something else that they could do to change up with their approach. And they do a lot of testing. So they're doing A/B testing where we're launching the story with different photos, different headlines to see what resonates best with the audience. And they may they may add to the story or shorten it. They may change the voice, etc. In terms of gold standard tools, I know they certainly love using Chartbeat, but even using Google Analytics and Google Docs where they're creating charts and sharing those charts is a good first solution. So I talked a little bit about A/B tests. Certainly, it's just, if we're not comparing, if we're not putting tests out there into the digital space to test what resonates most with audiences, teams might spend a lot of time trying to drive towards certain key KPIs where they're just not resonating, and they may think it's the sort of general subject area itself that's not resonating, but it in fact might be the article style. Like, maybe they should be looking at, rather than slideshows, maybe they should be looking at listicles or some other structure of story. And so some A/B testing around that kind of thing can certainly help. Is anyone using Google Analytics content experiments? So that is a free tool that certainly is also a gold standard that does require you to add a little bit of code to your site, but can let you do some free A/B testing around what's working. So you will put in URLs for different versions of a story, and it will give you a dashboard to watch and it'll sort of determine for you based on a preset number of page views, which piece is definitely working the best. So even if you only run it periodically on different types of pieces, it should give you a sense of what your audience prefers. I oversee digital edition, so that's a very sensitive area for me. I really believe in a reading experience that's perfect for the reader. So, we use a number of replica newsstands, and we also use Adobe DPS. So, we try to partner with those who help us create a really great experience. I know someone from Press Reader is here. We work with them on digital editions that have a reading mode that's great for the device, and we also create our own interactive magazines. On those new layouts that we do create, we did an experiment where we ran 2 different teams in parallel for a little while, where one was doing post-production, so they'd wait for the whole print magazine to be completed and sent off. And one was doing an integrated production where, using K4 with InDesign, we would have layout statuses set up. So wherever the initial print design was finalized such that all the assets were in place and they knew what the photos and other elements were going to be for that story, they would flag that. So then the digital edition experts could then start working with that story. And that allowed them to do it on a very granular basis. So we ended up adopting that model across the whole team. So we got a group of people that can work on several publications at once, rather than sort of hurry up and wait till that one's done, go crazy on it, be really stressed out about it, and then, oh, it's finally done, and then wait for the next one. We're able to interleave content from 6 different brands at once. So that really works quite well. And we use Adobe DPS and the View DPS connector in order to be able to test our work, in order to make sure that we're uploading everything very quickly and that we're not waiting around for machine processing time as well. So I have lots of knowledge on those sorts of things if anyone wants to ask further questions about that. From a multi-platform perspective where several things meet, another, long-standing basic is, let's try to schedule everything so it happens all at the same time. So let's have one story meeting, then we'll assign everything so that it's all due on the same day. Then we'll have one copy editing deadline. We'll have one checking deadline, and we'll have one art deadline. So then there's a lot of, again, hurry up and wait, and then people trying to cram certain things through departments all at the same time. So the alternative is to create a tiered schedule like this. So I've sort of zoomed in on a little zone there. I built a system that like sets all these dates automatically. We'll create sort of tiered dates for certain goalposts. And so if you're setting longer term content to be due earlier, you're able to take those big chunky pieces and give them more time through the workflow. And then obviously briefs and shorts and so forth can come in later in the process. And I think that's sort of often what ends up happening, but by planning it that way, nobody's stressed that they haven't got everything all at the same time. It makes it so that if you know the payoff of getting your assignment letters out earlier and all that kind of thing. So if you are kind of working in an everything at once workflow and you're trying to figure out how to get ahead, my recommendation is to try to take on a short-term high workload where you're assigning ahead 3 or 4 issues down the road. And then once that's complete, you'll be able to bring in the rest of it and you'll kind of have pushed things into a better workflow. Of course, I recommend a custom FileMaker solution for managing this kind of thing because I believe in that, but not everyone can do that. Excel can also do the job. And of course, sharing these sorts of schedules through Google Docs is also a great way to make sure everyone's looking at the same thing at the same time. Another common thing, of course, is not writing assignment letters. I find that it tends to be one of those vitamin things where a lot of people are like, yeah, I know I should. And writers kind of, I help run a writers group in Toronto called TFU that has about 900 members. And it's a common gripe that comes up where there's this whole expectation that what I heard over the phone is what I'm going to do, but in fact, the assigning editor or art director has a very different vision from what I have, and I have no paper to help me with that. So you get delays where a writer is not working on the right thing, or a shoot isn't being visioned the right way, and then there's a lot of second drafts happening and that kind of thing. And then an editor is trying to do a substantive edit, but they have no document to use as sort of a checklist about what should be in that story. So there's delays at that stage too. And then if your process is to let your art team look at your assignment letter in order to vision what the art is, again, they have no document. So you haven't set it up right. So an assignment letter does take a bit of work, but I think it does save a lot of time down the road. So I believe in a really prescriptive assignment letter. Is Alyssa here? Yeah, I was just talking with someone about working with her mom at Homemakers, and at first when we started working together, she was like, why? My story is 800 words. Your assignment letter are 800 words. Like, yeah, but you know exactly what we're trying to do. And that can be a conversation. If you think that there's something there that you don't agree with, or you have a better idea, by all means, let's change it so that we have a document that we both agree on. So I believe that every assignment letter should have the statement, this story will show that, what it is going to prove. Because if you can't say it that way, if you want to say the story is about, well, then you don't actually know what the story will prove. And every story's got to prove something, whether it's 50 words or 5,000 words. It should have one thing that it proves. Of course, you want to share what the word count is, what the tone and voice of the story should be, how many people that you want interviewed, and maybe you want to note, don't interview this guy, that guy, or the woman at that place, because they've already been interviewed so many times. I like to even suggest how to open a piece, because sometimes you just really don't want it opened in a certain way, so you might throw out some suggestions. And I know that sounds really prescriptive and it depends on who you're working with, but sometimes I think it's needed. And then if there's any art requirements, because of course now we're often asking writers to provide a lot of those sorts of things. Sometimes it's kind of assumed that art planning is the art director's job, and of course art directors need lots of trust and autonomy. But I think it's on the editorial side, it's our job to provide as much information as we can. So I really believe in having an art meeting where sheets are filled out with, what the story thesis is and all of the contact information, any concepts that you might have or anything to stay away from where a story may have been treated a certain way in the past. Just good to go through that process. And this one is vague feedback and assuming control. So it's kind of, when we're talking about production workflow, you might think I might talk a lot about like pre-press software or something like that, but I'm trying to bring in all of those things that I've seen can really create time wasters or dysfunctions that way. And so one of the things that happens sometimes is people don't have they're not sure about how to give feedback, so they provide really vague feedback, or they're under a lot of pressure to get everything perfect. So you get things like, I think this just needs something special, can you jazz it up or, something like that. So there's nothing specific, and that person walks away with question marks like drawn over their head and like, I don't know what to do. I've also heard like, this is just not the look we're going for right now. Again, like, so what are we going for? Do you have some tear sheets or something else you can offer me? And then, my all-time least favorite is just give it to me, I'll take care of it. It's just like, okay. So I've heard this, I've heard this around the office in the past, and again, not going to name any names, but what I've seen is staff are immediately looking like, oh, crestfallen, like I'm not good enough. And it's, look other people looking at them like you're not good enough, and nobody learns how to do the thing. So I feel like it's really important to make sure that to give feedback well, you are really specific. If you don't know exactly what you want, you suggest that people bring in a bunch of resource materials or tear sheets, or Annika was telling me earlier about someone using Pinterest boards and this kind of thing, just to work together on what that vision should be, own it together, solve those hard problems together, and then learn from the outcome, so that you can kind of take the responsibility and take the accolades or the learnings together rather than trying to separate it apart. I really believe in helping staff mentor them so that everyone can become that leader at some point. Again, with multi-platform content, we often run into problems where a shoot's done before the discussion about multi-platform has happened. So we're trying to create other products, and we didn't have the opportunity to include the shots required for various platforms in an assignment letter. So that makes it really hard to monetize other channels. So it's better to have a graphics planning meeting that includes all channels. So like, here's this story concept. How does this work for web? How does this work for our app? How does this work for social? Make sure that you get all of out of the shots that you need for that, and that your contract reflects that. Here's a quick example, and it doesn't work very well because it's static, but the idea is this is part of a tablet magazine story, and I can show anyone who'd like to see it afterward, but we shot a bunch of mix and match outfits, and as part of that story in tablet, we had it where you could swipe through those different options and mix and match the outfits. So if we hadn't have been part of that graphics meeting up front, we wouldn't have been able to say, please shoot off figure against white, and we wouldn't have been able to do that. So we always make sure that there's at least 3 or 4 stories an issue that have like a tablet specific outcome like that, so we can call it out in a push notification and marketing tools to say to readers that there's something cool they should try in that issue. And then, of course, if you're getting a shoot together where you've got some great food stylists, prop stylists, and a great team, of course, make sure that you're thinking down the road for how you might use those images later. So, as I mentioned, I work on books. Books are often a different orientation or a different layouts than our print edition, than our digital edition. So we need to make sure that all the shots have some of the different orientations. So don't just shoot a portrait and landscape, get a series of how-tos or like progress shots, and show it with the props and with fewer props so that there's room for copy later. So every image should have kind of every like end shot should have a sort of a set that go with it, so you can use it for all these different purposes. Of course, timeless is allowing staff to keep manuscripts on personal hard drives and that kind of thing. So you can have the story soonish. There's often a holdup where if manuscripts aren't centrally shared, It's hard for anyone else to get a sense of what the story is about. And of course, there's always files going missing and that kind of thing. So I really believe in making sure that everyone's working on a workflow database tool or a central server or something else to keep all manuscripts in one place so that everyone can access them, and just to flag them with a status or a name that indicates what stage they're at, and just make it clear that until things hit a certain stage, they shouldn't be laid out or checked or whatever that is. On the budgeting side, I get heavily into the budgeting side. I've done lots of sessions that are just about that. And I think it's really important, not because, of course, just because magazines are in a challenging financial situation and we should not go over budget. But aside from that, it creates a big workflow bottleneck when nobody's sure how much money they have to deal with things. So if your budget is sort of secret and someone has to come to one person to ask, can I spend this, or I don't know, it makes it really hard for them to just go ahead and plan things. So sharing a budget and estimating your expenses on all of your content as you're planning it can really make sure that everybody knows what's possible. I've seen a lot of cases where people don't really actually know what the budget is, so they just try not to spend anything, and then you end up maybe underperforming. Like there's some things that you could have done that you didn't even try to do, because if you know what your whole budget is, you can see it as kind of, it's all like one tub of water, but you can kind of put more here and less there. Maybe you want to blow this out, but to do that, you've got to save money here. And if nobody knows what that is, you can't approach it that way. So I definitely believe in using shared database or Google Doc or whatever else to track that. Another one is, of course, which version is the live file? So if you're keeping your manuscripts or art, your illustrations and things like that on personal drives, or even on servers where there's one folder and everything kind of gets dumped into it, definitely seen it happen where a layout is 3/4 through and people are trying to fact check and, oh, that's the wrong version of the manuscript. So, excuse me, I remember an issue of Toronto Life a few years ago where actually a full page went in that was the text because it had been reflowed at the last minute. I definitely recommend using a tool that will keep a revision history. So Google Docs can actually do that. That's just what I've pasted in on the side, where if you can work a document or a presentation and see the whole revision history and comments. That can be really helpful. Of course, big publishing houses like mine use InDesign with Vune K4, which is a terrific tool for seeing the status of everything, all the revision histories, and who things are assigned to and so forth. So usually that's a visual of it, but it's not pretty, but it definitely works. Of course, as I say, I'm married to an IT guy, so he is relentless about fonts. Fonts have been kind of I don't know what the right word is, the trickster figure of our industry forever, and that's still the case, as cool and digital as everything is now. So we get cases of people finding cool fonts on the internet and just trying to stick them into an issue. Maybe I'll just convert it to outlines and nobody will notice. Or, but the reality is that fonts do require licensing, so you do have to get it signed. But the bigger problem is often that, from a workflow perspective and a time perspective, you'll get to the end of the production stage, but then whoops, your pre-press group, like your production group and the print house don't have those fonts. So when you try to run the files, when you try to rip them, it all blows up, and then you have to go back and you might have to change the font and change the layout when you thought you've already gone to press. So it's an oldie but a goodie. So everybody needs to know what fonts you own and don't own. Try to work from that set and purchase fonts from reputable suppliers. Next is, we'll never need to use this content again. So working on brands like Canadian Living, a recipe is going to get printed over a decade. We'll probably leverage it 15 to 20 times. We might change it, but it will appear in so many different products, from calendars to apps to whatever. We need to make sure that there's a really good way of dealing with that content again. And I can't say that we have it perfect, but we need that. So when you're finishing up with materials, it's great if you can use an asset management system or even, a specific archive server and cloud space that's sort of read-only so that people can't delete anything and all of that sort of thing, and that you have it really clearly categorized. But if you can afford it, Adobe Experience Manager or Woodwing are great tools that will make your content searchable and keep it all together for you from an archive perspective. Then I guess looking at that backwards, the other part that's obviously really important is contracts. I know contracts are a sticky issue in the magazine industry, but certainly having contracts that allow you to continue use of assets in tandem with a creator after a certain period of time can be very beneficial, so that you're not buying work outright, but you're buying out the opportunity to co-use that. It will save you so much time in having those secondary, trying to find contributors from 5 years ago and all that sort of thing. So if you can do that with your contracts, it's worth the headache. And I love freelance writers, so. Okay, and then sort of print-specific things. One thing that I've often found up comes with smaller magazines is trying to create one design file for the entire magazine. This comes up surprisingly to me, over and over again, where I think the layout software just kind of leads art directors down that path sometimes, but then they end up with a really large file that's hard to deal with. They can't share it with others. So certainly breaking up your magazine into a set of files around articles makes it much more functional to work with. And again, K4 and Adobe DPS are great tools for that. Not shooting a cover image. Of course, you actually need a cover, but sometimes I've seen teams forgetting to shoot a cover specifically. So they'll do a whole bunch of really great shoots, and then at the end of the day, go through all those pictures and see if they can find a cover in there. And it's surprising how this happens even with teams on big magazines sometimes. So creating a cover shoot specifically and concepting what that's going to look like, sketching it, finding inspiration pieces, being very prescriptive about it, and as shots are being done, overlaying some of those shots with key cover elements like your banner and a key line, that kind of thing, making sure that that's going to work for a cover gives you a lot more flexibility. I still think, you may need to shoot a few different options for that cover. There may be a few different choices, but if you're at a shoot where there's a potential type of composition, then it should be applied like that. Changing the display after the layout was approved. So it's really nice to be able to write display copy once the layout is kind of put together, because then you can sort of see what really the right tone for the story is and that kind of thing. But it can be quite disruptive, because a different length of a headline or, wanting to add a longer deck and that kind of thing can make it so that the whole layout has to change. And so I prefer a process where the team collaborates on the display before the layout's created. I use a shared database tool where everybody puts in what their display ideas are. The editor-in-chief would remove all the ones that are not the final and sort of approve it, and then it goes to the art team, and that's where they can get those headlines from. So it's a way just to make sure we all know what that's going to be. And of course there'll be the odd situation where you see it all applied to the layout. You got to change it, but at least this way you've taken care of most of it. This one's again from my husband on the more of the IT side of things, but he said something that they see quite a lot is fights between the art team or maybe the editor and the pre-press team or the print house on color saturation, where it's that just doesn't reflect the way I want this shot to look. I need it to look, more of a sunset feel or whatever, pump the color, and then it gets through and you get lots of back and forth that can hold up your pre-press and your print house people, where they're telling you your paper can't take that. So having a really good conversation and maybe going on a press tour, that kind of thing, so that you can understand your paper, you can understand what it can take and what it can't take. You can see some really great samples just taking the time that your team really understands that, so you don't have all this internal angst about if only they would make it more orange or whatever it is, can ensure that you don't end up with muddy print jobs where everything just looks a little bit brown. So in terms of, best practices are really not just that sort of thing, but also calibration. So calibrated workstations with the right profiles, making sure that whenever you make any changes, that's all kept up to date. And my husband really recommends the ISO monitors. I don't think that's a plug. He's not sponsored. They're just apparently very good for color management. And last but not least, copy editing proofs. We use a system called Job Assistant that lets us look at all of our proofs digitally. And, occasionally I still catch people trying to do copy editing on that system where, they're like reading all the copy one last time. And it's really, this is just to make sure that the files got ripped properly, that nothing popped out. There wasn't like a hidden box. There wasn't, that the fonts all worked properly. Nothing got dropped off. It's really just to make sure that the production's going to work. So it's important to fix the workflow before that to ensure that when the files go to press, the copy editing and proofing is finished. It just saves that last minute scrabble and potentially press charges where you're having to change things very, very late in the game. We are, I think, in 6 different places, soon to be 7. So we try to think about it as where will the audience find us? So it's great to be with a series of different newsstands that take our PDF files because they certainly have different audiences that they attract. And some of them make really great partners in terms of co-promotion, and that can work really well. For our own magazine apps that are produced by us, we use Adobe DPS, and it's just changing now into what they're calling Adobe DPS 2015, which will become dated pretty fast. But anyway, so that tool integrates really well with InDesign because there's a lot of plugins created for InDesign by third parties like Vune. And it's a really good workflow for us. The thing that's interesting about DPS 2015 is that they're helping us move from that like months to moments publishing style where the new version includes featured articles that you can change up daily and web-fed content that will change like as it's fed. So it becomes a place that is not to check in on when your new issue is ready once a month. It becomes something you can look at every day because it's always got fresh stuff in it. And I think that's definitely where we need to go. The workflows on that can be similar, but you can also use a bunch of different authoring tools. You can send files to it via PowerPoint or Muse or Dreamweaver. Like it can take all kinds of different sources. You can do it in WordPress. So it kind of opens it up for those who have more of a web background. Yeah, I work for, I think, one of the best circulation VPs in North America, Chris Purcell. He comes from the US and he has just tons and tons of great experience. And when we started this process, he said, we're not giving this away. So we do not twin our subscriptions. When you subscribe to print, you can switch to digital, but you don't get digital as an add-on, and vice versa. So it's its own thing. And because people don't read both, they come because they have, some people want it in their mailbox, so it kind of reminds them to read, and they like to have it in their house. And some people don't want all the paper and they want to read on the go. And so there's different reader profiles. And I get a lot of people saying, I like what you're doing, but I just like print. I'm like, that's okay. You can love print and we love you. But there's all these people over here that really just want to read on their device. So I think bringing all of those marketing materials together where you're saying, read us here, read us, like, how do you want to read us? And kind of take people through different paths. Like, I want to read you like this, or I want to read you like that, and letting them choose, but making sure it's very available has been the big thing. I think it's critical. It's what people expect, that there's quite a lot of content available through digital channels at no charge. But when you're putting together, it's so funny that, you could read all of the content within a a free digital space if you kind of worked at it. But as soon as we kind of curate it, you know, put it together as a lovely package in a handy, convenient way, and make it packaged up for you so you feel like, you know, it's something really beautiful and it's entertaining, it's kind of a gift to yourself, then people don't mind paying for it. So you kind of have to keep some of those hallmarks of what it is that I want to pay for. Because right now people will still pay for magazines where there's no way they'll pay for web content. So an important thing for me on digital editions is making sure that we always present something that looks like a magazine in some way, that it's going to have a cover and it's going to have a sense of beginning and middle and end, and it's going to be a package of different types of things. Because as soon as we move away from that, no one will pay for it. And circulation is, I mean, like subscription revenue and single copy revenue is a very, very healthy thing. You know, not just because we need the money, but also for on the ad side so that we can prove that someone wants it. It's somewhere between 10 and 15%. We try to make sure everything's sort of scaled to it so they grow together. And what it also does for us is provides an immense amount of data. So we're able to take all of that, you know, how many times did people read that story? Which was the most popular? What wasn't popular? How long did they read it for? So I make sure that when I do like a digital SIP on a Canadian Living, like baking piece or something, all the recipes are broken out separately, so I can tell you exactly which cookie everyone made and which one they didn't make, you know? So that helps us change our cover strategy for all mediums to helps us choose what books to print, helps us choose what videos to make, because we know what people actually do. Like, because if there's like 20 hours of time on that recipe and 13 on that one, it's really clear what people are using. Exactly. No, I have a meeting with the Quebec team every couple months where we look at, and I can tell them, well, look, you know, the Quebec market is its own beautiful animal, and you can put Miley Cyrus on the cover, but, you know, at the time, when they put Eugenie Bouchard on the cover, she outperformed. So, you know, she's you should use a high-profile local celebrity over a high-profile international celebrity. That was very in telling for them. So yeah, it's absolutely going back to the print cover strategy, and I'm involved in all the print cover sign-off meetings, and I bring that knowledge to that every single time. I guess it sort of needs to be when there's a symptom. So if people are working a lot of overtime, you know, there's some legalities around that, and you know, it doesn't make for long-term staff retention. If you're late for your press dates, you know, if you're not able to get the volume of digital content online that you feel that you could with the people you have, there's certain symptoms that might make you want to bring someone in from outside, which I would highly recommend, so that you have like a bad guy that comes and goes, but can kind of just sit down. And the Magazines Canada Traveling Consultants program can be great for that. I'm one of their traveling consultants, and they've got a whole bunch of people who can come in and for a pretty low charge, just do a full staff day where you kind of walk through all the parts and figure out, you know, and ask some questions and make some recommendations. There's the Magazines Canada website actually has a whole hot sheet section that has some specific areas outlined. Like, to get a personal view, the Traveling Consultants program I'd really recommend. Just because you'll get someone with a lot of experience who, again, can come in and say unpopular things, but it doesn't matter. I think we've kind of moved from trying to do a couple of things really, really well to trying to do quite a lot of things. And so, you know, that revenue pie has a lot more slices in it than it used to. So maybe, like, we try to build optimism around trying new things that have good revenue potential, like product licensing and events and things like that, where we can think about how to use our brands in different ways. And, you know, I think getting people involved in those sorts of projects can really help with morale, because nobody likes seeing newsstands charts going like this, but we just try to talk to them about all the other ways. I mean, it's great now. PMB has changed into Vivid data. We're getting different kinds of audience information that reflect a digital audience as well. So that kind of thing helps a little bit with showing graphs that don't just go down. In fact, we have large and loyal audiences. So to kind of focus again, like my boss is knows a lot about circulation and a lot about newsstand. And he said, you know, maybe instead of trying to figure out how to cut every year to reflect declines in newsstands, we need to plan for when we don't do newsstand anymore. And what does our business look like then? And what is that revenue mix? And how do we start working towards that and stop just trying to protect that or have conversations every day about how to save money because of that? I don't think that there is a lot that we do that we don't offer in some free digital way that we have behind a paywall for our brands. We just recognize that there's different audiences looking for different things, and again, when we kind of package it up and produce it in a certain way, then it's that gift to yourself and that escape that you're going to pay for. And when it's diced up and presented in a sort of more searchable, convenient way, then I'm not going to pay for that. And we don't have don't use this online till then or any of those sorts of things. We're just trying to be as timely as we can. Great. Thanks very much for having me, everybody. Appreciate it.